Hello guys, today we're going to be looking at how to deal with oddly placed and problematic sprue gates in kits. This is inspired by the current kit I'm working on, a very not refined Hobbyboss kit, and especially the turret here. They've put the sprue gates right in the middle of a molded weld seam, which essentially means the weld seam is going to be destroyed when you sand it. So I figured, why don't I make a quick video showing how I deal with that, and then I figured, well, why don't we also just talk about a quick few other points on dealing with oddly placed and problematic sprue gates as I commonly see in kits. And this would also be a great way to spark some discussion because everyone has some tips and tricks, and you can just post them in the comments below and we can help everyone out. One of the most frustrating things in a kit is when it seems like the guy who designed the molds and all this stuff has never actually built a plastic model, and so they have no idea about how to make it engineered in a way that sparks passion when you build the kit. The high level modeler way to do this would be to just sand it smooth and then sand off the entire weld seam and then just make your own with putty or something like that. And that's definitely something you can do. But this kit is just a quick build for me. It's supposed to be a stress-free project, and I don't want to go crazy on making all the weld seams and stuff. It's not worthwhile because the rest of the level of detail in the kit doesn't make that worthwhile. It's just a waste of time. I would spend as much time redoing the welds as I do building the entire kit. It's a pretty basic one. So let's stop rambling and let's deal with sprue gates. So I'm just going to cut it, with enough distance so I have some leftover sprue gate to work with. Now what I really want to do, I'll just describe it first and then we'll actually do it, is I want to essentially clean up the sprue gate in such a way where I leave part of it sticking out, and then I will then essentially shape that into the weld seam so it continues across the part. As you can see, of course, the sprue gate is actually wider than the weld seam. So we're going to have to turn half of this sprue gate into the flat armor panel, and the other half we're going to have to leave it raised and then make that look like a continuation of the weld seam. I've cut it more flush. You can see it's pretty close to the weld there. And I'm going to use my hobby knife with a fresh blade. Important here, don't skimp out on blades. You can buy also higher quality blades, but a blade like this costs a couple pennies. Your kit costs $40-50 plus your time invested in it. You can afford to use a couple of new blades per project. It's worth it to not ruin your kit. So I'm going to carefully try to scrape this a little bit lower. I can even use my trusty file. I know people like to use sanding sponges. I like my file. And I'm really just trying to get the nub itself down to the same level as the weld seam. Then the next step is going to be to essentially cut it like this and then essentially carve out the section that's going to be the flat armor panel. Along the weld seam itself, I'm going to make a cut down the middle of that sprue gate, and I'm going to cut down until I hit the actual, armor panel. And then I'll come from this way and basically cut that wedge out. There we go. See, it kind of clipped a little bit. That's because the knife cleaved the gate up until it hit that cut I just made from the top, and I just removed a little sliver. So I don't know if you can see that now, but I've essentially, not perfectly, I'm gonna have to sand it a little bit, but I've turned that huge thick gate into a part that's pretty flush with the armor panel, and then a part that is part of the weld now. Now I'm going to do a little cleanup, probably off camera because I have to get close to do this. But I'm going to just make everything a little bit more flush. All right, now I've done a little bit more work, just carefully sanding and scraping to make everything more flush with the height of the panel, armor panel, and the weld. Hopefully you can see kind of where it used to be just because of the discoloration and stress in the plastic. But everything is pretty smooth now. And the last step is simply to use my blade to add some weld texture to the remaining part of that gate that was covering up the weld itself. All right, so that's our end result. I might polish it up a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with that. And again, it matches the level of detail in the rest of the kit. So what more could I ask for? All right, with our quick demo finished, I figured I'd just do a little bit of discussion about other issues that you can have and how I deal with them. And I'll show you the tools I use as well, because I use stuff beyond my usual metal file in some cases. So one example is sometimes, pretty commonly, you can have sprue gates that just consume the teeth, especially on a small sprocket like this. The sprue gates can simply, like I said, consume the entire thing. In that case, you really just got to kind of recarve it. Now, sometimes you can actually look at the back of the part and you can actually still see the contour. That's pretty common. If it looks completely covered on one side, sometimes the other side actually shows you the contour. So you can just get in there and sand it. Now, what you really want ideally is something like this main kit here, where they've actually undergated the sprue attachment points on the drive sprockets. This is what Meng does all the time, and I really appreciate it because, as you can see, it's almost like the, if you can see from the side, the sprue gate's almost coming from the top or maybe the bottom. So what you have to do in this case is you just cut the part, you cut it flush there and actually almost sand down from this direction and then just get it flush with the other surface, and it gets rid of the whole sprue gate there. That's something you also see in some high quality Gundam kits as well. It's just a sign of good engineering, and a person who designed the kit wanted it to be a fun thing to put together, which can be rare on some manufacturers. Additionally, you can have sometimes on a turret or a cupola interior, you can have a part that kind of spans, like a sprue gate part that kind of spans across the interior face. And if it's relevant because you're going to be seeing that on the interior, it can be hard to get a smooth contour when you're sanding away that sprue gate, because if you use something flat, you're going to obviously do some damage to the sides of the contour before you get the interior of the sprue gate attachment flush. Now, the common way people will say is use a sanding sponge or something like that. I do have sanding sponges. I love these God Hand ones. You can also cut them. They're just like foam. You can cut them to make a narrower wedge. But I don't use these on a concave surface like this. I'll use them on a convex surface like a wheel, because you're simply getting rid of that sprue gate material before you get rid of the wheel material. Even though this is squishy, if you're doing that in here, you're going to be removing material from the actual interior face of that turret ring while you're getting rid of the nub. It's unavoidable. What I use in that case is I have a metal file that is rounded. I've also got one that's actually like a full circle here somewhere. Hopefully you can see the cross section there. This one's a circle, which is really good in some cases. This one's flat on the bottom and curved on the top. And this is ideal because you can really just match that contour. Another example is you can get a sprue gate between raised details. So you get one between the two teeth of this guide sprocket, or I've got another example I can show you here of one between raised panels on the Sager missile here. And that's just a case where you need to either get in there with the hobby blade and do it by hand, scrape it away, or you need a very thin, I think there's some Infinity sanding sticks people talk about. I don't have any, but I think they're like a sponge that are really narrow. Or what I can actually do is I can use the edge of my metal file, which still has the rasp on it. You can actually sand it like that. That's a good technique because these are really rigid, so you can actually sand pretty well like that. The last thing we can talk about is gun barrels and grab irons and stuff like that. Now, ideally you want a metal barrel, but sometimes you can end up with sprue gates on the rounded barrel. As you can see, there was one there and one there on the underside. You can see the discoloration. In that case, I will use a metal file, sand it away, and then I will use a sanding sponge at the end, just for the last, tiny little sliver of it. And that helps you to match the curved surface, because this will flex and it will help you do that properly without getting a flat spot, as a file will if you do it all the way. With these grab irons, I will usually clip them off as close as I can. You gotta be careful to leave a little bit extra, otherwise you're gonna actually cut into the grab iron itself. And then I simply sand it along the axis of the grab iron like this. I carefully hold it in my hands. It can be tricky sometimes. And then I basically am sanding it like this, and I'm rotating across the contour like this as I go. And this can be really tricky because these parts are small and hard to hold, and sometimes they can ping out of your hands and fly away, but that's really the only way to do it in my experience, apart from bending your own from bronze phosphor wire or whatever they use for that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Yep, so just a couple of basic techniques here. Another trick is sometimes you can have multiple sprue gates along the length of part like this. You can actually, while the whole thing is still on the sprue, cut off some of those, and then you can actually use the sprue itself as a way to hold it securely while you sand off other points or seam lines and so on. And then the last sprue gate, you have to do it as I just showed you there, holding it gingerly and sanding it off. Again, if you have any other advice, post it in the comments below for everyone else's enjoyment. I appreciate the sharing of information in our hobby. That's kind of the reason why we all started our YouTube channels back in the day. I don't think you'll see a build on this kit because it's kind of weird and no one cares about it, but I've got some other stuff coming soon like that Ukrainian Bradley. As always, if you like my work, you can support me on Patreon for just $1 a month. That really helps me out. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, stay safe and happy modeling. See ya.